are literally shaping the planet.
Purpose is the only pathway to a regenerative future.
We have a choice to stay with the status quo or to change.
What is the point of trying to be just resilient when we can actually innovate?
Welcome, everybody. It's great to be here this evening. For those of you still sticking around as we kind of wind down the second day of Shadow Summit, I know it's been quite an adventure and definitely a transition for our team, going from a typically in-person event to a digital one. But behind the scenes, we've had an awesome team that's been running it. So, thank you to all of them and the Shadow team for taking time out of your day to moderate this. Like Nick said, my name's Brian Sayre. I'm a senior associate at Shadow Ventures. Before we jump into this, full disclosure, I am an outsider to this industry, but I take that sometimes with a positive because I bring a different mindset to a lot of the challenges that I see within this space. I do consider myself a bit of a millennial anarchist, and I definitely took that point of view in creating this report. When I started this, I honestly got stuck for a while, and the opening slide of the report that I was creating just said "good luck" in all caps with a big exclamation at the end of it. I looked at the site of industrialized construction and offsite manufacturing and said, man, this holds all of the answers to the challenges that I'm looking at in this space. But there are so many barriers to actually executing and bringing this technology and bringing these capabilities to the forefront of our ecosystem. So really what I had to do was I just kind of took a step back. I stopped trying to make industrialized construction work within the existing structure and the existing bubble that we had created, and I tore it all down. And so when I first started doing that, I really started to get into some rhythm of kind of what I wanted to present in the story I was trying to tell. So this is just the first version of the report. I'm actively exploring other areas and kind of expanding my own knowledge base. A new version that I'm getting ready to release here shortly looks at smart modules and that technology. I'm also really keenly interested in industrialized construction for general contractors. I want to dig more into the Japanese landscape and how that ecosystem has evolved. So as soon as KP buys me a plane ticket to Japan, I want to go tour some of the factories over there and really meet with some of the leaders that are pushing that industry forward. And then the last piece is industrialized construction and a sustainable future. How do we create more sustainable buildings, and how do we reduce the amount of waste that goes into the construction process? So with that, bear with me as I run through this. This is my first time presenting to a live audience, but hopefully you all find it engaging, and looking forward to some Q&A at the end. So despite the technological advancements that we've seen in our space, we're going to start with a pretty obvious statement. The built environment still lags behind other more developed industries. I think the one I commonly hear is that beyond the hunting and fishing industry, it might just be the hunting industry, we are the least technologically advanced industry in the country. We know that we still suffer from massive labor shortages that's only compounding now. We have sustainability needs that we need to address to fight climate change and also take on new regulations that are being put in place. We have cost controls that we need to tackle. We have an affordability crisis and also a demand issue where we can't build enough fast enough. And then that leads into the final point, which is we need to figure out a way to make this entire ecosystem more efficient and accelerate the process across the entire value chain. So what's the problem that we're looking at? I sum this up as we are innovating a broken industry. We're trying to innovate the current process, and it's only going to create incremental innovations within that. As an example, a tool that digitizes a part of the current process is not ever going to be disruptive. It will deliver some sort of value to it, but nothing that's going to completely revolutionize the space and create this disruptive change that we're all waiting for. The reason for that is simple. The current process is broken. We've created these artificial walls and procedures that do nothing but create roadblocks, diminishes transparency, destroys efficiency, and creates massive amount of waste. So let's bring out the anarchist a little bit. What's the solution here? We tear it all down. If we want to innovate the built environment, we have to start with innovating the process to create the disruption that we need. And through this, we can unlock the value that we demand. We'll be able to transform the way we construct and fabricate. We'll be able to rethink the way we use digital technology to design, manage, and operate. And finally, we'll be able to increase transparency and knowledge on how we procure and deliver projects. So when I look at this space, and the underlying thesis that I'm looking at right now is industrialized construction is a big piece of this key going forward. The underlying statement that I've been developing is that all emerging technologies and innovations become exponentially more valuable when placed in the context of a built environment structured around industrialized construction and offsite manufacturing. If we look at some technology examples for that, robotics and automation work best when they're doing repetitive tasks, not custom work. AR and VR is more powerful when the design changes and decisions and outcomes can be displayed in real time, and there's a need for a digital kit of parts for ease manipulation and customization of those virtual models. Blockchain can create massive transparency in the supply chain when controlled in a manufacturing type setting, and it can create a digital ledger of every nut and bolt and a comprehensive digital twin. Big data is best when it's clean or common and consistently collected automatically, and valuable data can then unlock the true potential of generative design. And finally, if we look at smart buildings and IoT technology, to unlock that, we have to have a standardization of design and hardware and new partnerships with the tech giants. So when we ask the question, why now? A quick history check. The Industrial Revolution happened in the 1820s, and unfortunately, it's still 2020 here. So that means we're 200 years behind when other industries started to embrace the industrialized process. Now, as they evolve and they move into Industry 3.0 and start to embrace IoT and connected factories, we're still playing catch up and doing the same thing this way we were 200 years ago. Not only are we playing catch up to other industries, but we're also playing catch up to the rest of the world, particularly when we look at Europe and Japan. And this isn't a position the US normally finds itself in. Usually we're at the forefront of innovation. We're the ones who are pushing industries forward. And in this case, we're very much playing catch up. When I spoke with Integra's CEO, Jerry McCoffey, he told me that he first wrote his report on industrialized construction 40 years ago while studying at the University of Dublin. That means that within our country, we are already a generation behind in terms of capabilities and education for the future workers of this space. If we start to frame this as an economic opportunity, we have workers, we have factories that can meet the demand for industrialized construction. And if we don't increase the demand for that and get these factories up and running, it's going to be outsourced to other countries. The elephant in the room for the why now is COVID. It has created a certain set of factors that did not exist before, and it has accelerated others. Social distancing on a job site and still expecting to maintain the same level of efficiencies and productivity that we did before COVID isn't realistic. We already had massive labor shortages within our industry. And when I speak with my brother who owns and operates a HVAC company down in South Florida, that problem has only been exacerbated by COVID. He cannot find enough qualified labor to actually meet the demand for the projects that he has. As we look at a looming recession, we have to start rethinking how we're actually doing business and how we're creating value for these stakeholders. And finally, the use of buildings has changed. Shadow's office is in a WeWork space, and I can tell you that none of us are excited to go back to a model where it involves shared services and cramming 10 people into a small office space. So we have to think about how we can start to make buildings more flexible to meet the changing demands of the consumers without having to tear them down and rebuild them from scratch. Another key point is we've been here before. Industrialized construction and offsite manufacturing is nothing new. The Sears modern homes were in production from 1908 to 1940. And during that time, they sold 70,000 units with 370 different designs. So why didn't that stick? Another fairly obvious answer, but we all know the built environment is extremely complex and it's also a custom industry. But unlike then, today we have new digital tools and technology that can make these barriers easier to overcome. Through these digital tools, we can begin to streamline designs, we can accelerate the construction process, and we can create supply chain transparency that has never before been imagined. So what's the answer that we look for? Due to lack of a better name, what I'm currently calling it is the IC Sandbox, or the Industrialized Construction Sandbox, which at its core is a digital ecosystem for assembling a kit of parts. And the goal of this sandbox is to increase the demand for offsite manufacturing solutions. So some of the key questions that I would look for the IC Sandbox to answer first is location. So who can supply the project based on where it's actually being built? Second is the performance. So how does it function? Is it 2D elemental? Is it 3D volumetric? Is it for multifamily, residential, healthcare, hospitality? How can I upgrade that unit through energy and different technology capabilities? How complex is the structure? How does it scale? Is it individual units and panels, or is it a completed structure? And where is it fabricated? Is it offsite, onsite, or is it some combination of the two? Third, what is the look of that unit, and how is the completed building going to be? What is the overall appearance, and how can I customize it to make it unique to the purpose of my project? And last but not least, the cost. How much is it going to cost? What are the budget trade-offs on performance and look? And how can I get a clear understanding of how much it's going to cost in the very beginning of the project life cycle versus at the end when I start getting surprise bills? So now let's look at how this IC Sandbox starts to create different value for the key stakeholders across our value chain. I think we start at the top. You have to go to the developers first, because in the way I view this space, they're the ones who gain the most from the full embrace of an industrialized construction. So the two basic needs that I think developers are looking for is, one, transparency. So more transparency into the cost and the schedule of where their projects are at any given time. And second is increasing their knowledge. So what sort of options and how can they customize based on that digital kit of parts? And the value that's going to be created for developers is widespread. But to summarize it, there's a cost savings both during construction and while operating. There's the marketability of a building. There's a superior building quality. And then last, there's an accelerated timeline that can be applied. The value for the architects is an interesting one, because as I look at them, I think they are at considerable risk of being disrupted if they don't look at change now. I was on a panel discussion last week with the large firm roundtable in AIA, and my advice to them was to start developing business models for the future now. If industrialized construction is the standard in 10 years, what happens to your firms as they exist today? If they do embrace that, I think there's some exciting opportunities for them. The first is it's an opportunity to monetize product design versus project design. I use the example of the Frank Gehry kitchen and making that accessible to everyday consumers. This model would then start to look more like a product licensing business. It also allows you to unleash the creativity and eliminate repetitive, mundane tasks. And who really wants to design a door feature? Is that why architects go to school for 100+ years? I don't think so. And last but certainly not least is it's an opportunity to get the youth excited, and it's also a way to differentiate your firm and attract better talent from your competitors. Next in the value chain are the engineers. And I think this is a particularly exciting time for the engineers that want to be inventors again. It's an opportunity to develop and innovate new structures and systems to push a building's technological capabilities further and faster than ever before. And it's also a great opportunity to start looking at ways in which we can look at process engineering in this space. Next is the operators. For them, it's kind of boiled down into two main buckets for me. One, higher quality structures in theory will break down less, so it's an easier structure to operate. And the second, more valuable, is they can finally gain access to true digital twins and total insights and control, which goes back to the blockchain point that I made earlier. One area that I think will largely take off is a trend that I continue to see within the space is vertically integrated companies. I largely think that this is the future of AEC firms. And what they're doing here is they're combining design, build, and operate under one roof. So in this model, you are bringing the key teams in-house, which is going to result in higher operating costs. But if run correctly, you should be able to lower your total project costs, work more agile in sprints, and embrace computational design, remove barriers and conflict of interest, so no more blame game and passing the liability to others. And finally, it increases transparency and collaboration. So it's no longer me versus them, but changes the conversation to us. A couple examples of that to watch. I think what Aaron Holm and his partner Nelson Del Rio at Blockable are doing is a really interesting model and a company to track and continue to watch. Essentially what they've created is they are becoming vertically integrated developers. And what I find so interesting about this model is that any value that they create in terms of a superior product, more sustainable structure, greater marketability, et cetera, they are capturing 100% of that value because at the end of the day, they own and control the equity in the end product that's built. And what's fascinating about this, when you look at it from a financial lens, is the model starts to work really beautifully with commercial real estate financing. Another one that is embracing this, but is a different player in the value chain, is what Skinder's doing. They are looking at becoming a GC vertically integrated offsite manufacturer. And what's fascinating about this is they go from one of on-site project management to complete project lifestyle management. So for them, all of the efficiencies that they're able to gain, all of the early insights and input that a general contractor wishes they had in the design and engineering phase of a project, they're now able to capture all of that value by bringing those teams in-house and working within their standardized kit of parts. So let's take a second and kind of talk about where I view as two of the key cogs and how an industrialized sandbox actually kicks off. And I think that's connecting the building product manufacturers with the offsite manufacturers. To start that conversation though, I want to take a look at another industry real quick. So if we look at the automotive industry and Ford in particular, Ford creates the Mustang, but they create 11 different models of the Mustang that range anywhere in price from $25,000 to over $75,000. I could show probably any of the attendees right now on this a picture of a Mustang, and you would be able to look at that and say, that's a Mustang. So if the structures and the outside appearance is very similar or almost the same in many cases, what's actually the difference and what's driving the difference in price cost between these? Where you start to see that is it's the difference in systems that make up those models. As a customer, I have the options based on my budget and performance requirements where I can select what engine I want, what drive chain I want, how smart I want my vehicle to be, and a whole list of other features that come from their standard kit of parts that decide what Mustang I'm actually going to buy. I think within the built environment, customers are still going to demand this. They're still going to want customization, and we have to be able to provide that optionality for them in an off-site setting. It'll probably be to a larger extent than what we see within the automotive industry. So it's even more important there than it is in that space. And I think a key point here, and a final one to make, is that the companies and the manufacturers that are providing Ford with these systems are also providing these systems for Ford's competitors. Allison Transmission doesn't just make transmissions for one car manufacturer. They make it for multiple ones, but every time that transmission is custom for that particular structure that they're designing it for. The second piece that I think we can learn from the automotive industry is that they're focused on building brands. When I say the name Ford or Tesla or Chevy, you don't think of a manufacturing company. Typically, the first thing you're going to think of is the specific product that they make. Ford makes the Mustang, but they also make the F-150, the Bronco, and a litany of other vehicles. And each one of those products has a target audience and each has a designed specific use and function that any of their customers would be able to immediately recognize. So when we bring this back to the built environment, what can we learn here? Building product manufacturers need to start designing systems and not pieces and parts. The building product manufacturers, I think, are at extreme risk of being disrupted unless they embrace this chain. The supply chain and the customer relationships that they have can be completely upended. They will now be selling direct to consumers, potentially eliminating the need for distributors. There's also going to be a need for just-in-time ordering. And last, there's also an opportunity to improve insight and accelerate innovation, because now they'll be working directly with their customers and being able to collaborate on what sort of systems go in those structures to really deliver what they're building for and the customer that they're building for as well. So last but not least, what the AEC Sandbox will first do is connect offsite manufacturers and building product manufacturers. And the goal of that is to start designing custom systems that work for offsite manufacturer structures. It'll exponentially increase the quality and amount of data available to developers to make more educated decisions. It'll create total transparency into the cost and performance of a structure, and it'll do that through a generative design technology before anything is actually built. So let's take a second and look at future value, and I'm gonna grab a quick drink of water. So when we look at the future, where else can industrialized construction take us? And again, this kind of touches on some areas that I'm exploring and writing future reports on for this. But the first is smart structures. So how do we bring Google and Amazon to the built environment and start to unlock smart buildings that are connected to structures and systems? So rather than just an Alexa-enabled product, we could have Alexa-enabled buildings. How do we begin to have no waste in green buildings? It still astonishes me that there's construction dumpsters on construction sites. And I bring up Integra again. If you're not following them, I highly encourage you to go check out their LinkedIn and the posts that they make. And they're making this exact argument. And then the last within the sustainability piece is it's a way to create and accelerate adoption of green product tech and also increase transparency into the performance and knowledge on the cost and payback of any given building. Another future value is the ability to update buildings. With the rapid pace that we see in technology today, by the time a building opens, they're essentially outdated. The industrialized construction can create a way to standardize and update buildings without the need for expensive renovations. Through push notifications, you can quickly update all of the software within your building. And it's a way for us to keep our buildings and infrastructure technologically advanced longer. And finally, it's a way to address our demand issue within this space. It sounds obvious, but we need a way to make this industry cool again. And you do that by tackling big problems with exciting, technologically advanced solutions. We need to start recruiting the nerds and geeks to the built environment. I look at Tesla as a perfect example for this and what they did by making the automotive industry cool. No one was going to work in the automotive industry until Tesla came up and had a very bold and very big vision for what they were trying to do. Now, because of Tesla, we see companies like Rivian and Nikola that are attracting the top tech talent in the industry. And people are clamoring for jobs out of top universities to go and work for these companies and push them forward faster than ever before. And then lastly, we have a labor force ready to go that has come from the disruption of other manufacturing type settings. We have the facilities in place within our country that are ready to open, and we need to embrace that and start putting it back into operation. So I leave you with this. What are some of the key takeaways that we can take from all of this? First, you're not competing against each other yet. The offsite manufacturers need to embrace collaboration and a more open ecosystem so that they can grow together. There is plenty of room for growth within this space for all of you. And if you embrace, again, looking at Tesla and the way that they approach the space, Elon famously said, we are not competing against other electric vehicle companies. We are competing against the incumbent gas car manufacturers. And that same holds true for industrialized construction. Offsite manufacturers are not competing against each other yet. They're competing against the broken process and system that exists today. Another common argument that I hear is, panels versus modules and which one is the actual future. I actually think that there is room and a need for both within this space. there are a litany of different building types in the built environment. And each one of those is going to require different solutions, and the industry is still going to demand options. And last but not least, if you are a AEC firm listening to this, my suggestion would be to start preparing now. Forget what you do and start to structure a new reality 10 years in the future. If industrial construction becomes the standard, how are you going to continue to add value and stay relevant in this new ecosystem? And as I look at a couple ways forward, two of the biggest issues I see within this space still, at Shadow Ventures, we have Shadow Labs, and we have a number of really incredible modular startups entering that space. And there is a definite lack of funding to support these entrepreneurs. And unfortunately, I don't think venture capital is the answer. The biggest challenge within this is it's a math problem. They require a large amount of capital today with high valuations so that the owners can keep control, and that typically doesn't work really well within a venture capital model. I don't know exactly what the answer is for that piece yet, but I imagine it starts to more look like a private equity model, or starts to more look like what Blockable's doing by becoming vertically integrated developers. And then last, the industry has to start embracing the change. If you start taking the risk of testing these different solutions today and modeling what the future could look like, you're going to be one of the ones who benefits from it tomorrow and isn't disrupted in the future. So that is my presentation. I hope you all found it interesting. And if there are any questions, I'm happy to answer those now. All right, looks like we've got one. So who will be the first movers to disrupt the current broken ecosystem? Design, build, operate, and drive and co-create the new open collaboration AEC Sandbox, the third platform. I think some of the first movers we're going to see here are the developers. I think, again, when we look at the vertically integrated developers, they're going to be the ones who, if they start to really look at the space and think about their business models, it will drastically change with that. Awesome, Ryan, thank you for jumping in. So let me see if I can try to summarize this one. Okay, so do we need to first have successful examples of vertical integrations before moving to horizontal integrations? And so what we're looking at with horizontal integrations is things like Splash Modular and Project Frog, where they're trying to build the technology piece for design, build, operate. I think that is a really interesting challenge within this. At the end of the day, I think they're going to probably grow together. I think the horizontal integrations and the technology pieces are vastly different businesses than a Blockable or a Katera trying to develop their own internal technology. And I think they're going to learn that the hard way at the end of the day. If you look at who the technology providers are, it's a very different business model than being an offsite manufacturer. And I think the two need to grow together almost at the same time. This is a good one. What career advice would you give to a recent architecture grad relating to modular opportunities? I would start reaching out to some of the modular owners. They are very responsive. A lot of their teams are growing quite fast. Sidewalk Labs is one that, I mean, obviously it's Google, so it's not an easy company to break into, but I follow them on LinkedIn and they're always posting new job opportunities that they're looking at. All right, and I am unfortunately out of time, so I'm not gonna be able to get to that last question, Jackson, but if you wanna ask it in the Slack channel, I'll jump over there now.
Ryan, that was excellent. Thank you, man.
Cool, thanks, Nick.